Today is September 27, 1964, and this is NBC Nightly News. Reporting tonight, Alexa Fitzgerald.
Tonight on NBC Nightly News, the Warren Commission's report on the Kennedy assassination was made public today. Later, we are looking back on the events that shaped the presidency of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. We will discuss the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Berlin Wall, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Peace Corps, the Civil Rights Movement, and his relationship with the American people. I'm Alexa Fitzgerald. Our beloved President Kennedy was assassinated almost a year ago, shortly after noon Central Time, on November 22, 1963, in Dealey Plaza, riding an open motorcade in downtown Dallas, Texas. Bullets struck the president's neck and head as he was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, just a few minutes away. In the operating room, doctors determined that nothing more could be done for the president to recover from these severe wounds. At 1 p.m., President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was pronounced dead after a Catholic priest was summoned to administer last rites. Mrs. Kennedy refused to leave for Washington, D.C. without her husband's body and had it transported to Love Field, where it was placed on Air Force One. Before the plane took off, Jackie Kennedy stood by Lyndon B. Johnson as he took the oath of office administered by U.S. District Court Judge Sarah Hughes at 2:38 p.m. Less than an hour later, police arrested Lee Harvey Oswald, who was believed to have shot President Kennedy from the Texas School Book Depository. 2 days later, Oswald was scheduled to be transported from police headquarters to the Dallas, Texas County Jail. As millions watched, the transfer, nightclub owner Jack Ruby shot and mortally wounded Oswald at point-blank range. Oswald was taken to Parkland Memorial Hospital, the same one doctors tried to save Kennedy's life days earlier. The same day, President Kennedy's flag-draped casket was moved from the White House to the Capitol on a caisson drawn by 6 gray horses, accompanied by one riderless black horse. At Mrs. Kennedy's request, ceremonial details were modeled after the state funeral of Abraham Lincoln. 3 days after being slain, President Kennedy was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery. Afterwards, at the gravesite, Jackie and her husband's brothers, Robert and Edward Kennedy, lit the eternal flame in a private ceremony. Tonight, we now have confirmation from the Warren Commission, headed by Chief Justice Earl Warren, that Oswald was the lone assassin, and that Ruby acted alone when he killed Oswald. The 888-page report was given to President Johnson 3 days ago by the Commission members in the Oval Office and made public today. The Warren Commission, otherwise known as the President's Commission on the Assassination of John F. Kennedy, was established by Kennedy's successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, on November 29, 1963, a week after Kennedy's death, to investigate the assassination. The Bay of Pigs invasion, originally a CIA plan approved by President Eisenhower to overthrow Fidel Castro in Cuba in April 1961, was left to JFK with the decision of what to do about the Bay of Pigs invasion. Based on the CIA's calculation that it would spark a popular uprising against Castro, Kennedy ordered the 1,500-man force of Cuban exiles trained by the CIA in Guatemala to invade Cuba. The Cuban exiles landed at the Bay of Pigs, where they were quickly met by the Cuban army. At this time, Soviet Premier Khrushchev threatened to defend Cuba, so Kennedy decided not to militarily assist the exiles at the Bay of Pigs. There was no uprising, and after 3 days, all the exiles were either killed or captured by the Castro-led Cuban army. In 1962, $52 million in food and medical supplies as a ransom was paid to free and capture exiles. The failure of the invasion made the young Kennedy look vulnerable and indecisive to the rest of the world. The USSR interpreted this as a sign that they could take more aggressive action towards the United States. It also came as a shock to many, as they believed that President Kennedy would eventually allow the American military to intervene in Cuba on their behalf. However, as much as he did not want to abandon Cuba and let the communists take over, Kennedy said he would not start a fight that might end in World War III. In November 1961, after taking public blame for the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, JFK approved Operation Mongoose to try and make up for the disaster. The CIA mission was to try and overthrow Castro or the Cuban government using an espionage and sabotage campaign. The CIA was never allowed to go so far as to provoke an outright war, so the campaign under Kennedy would fall as Fidel Castro would reign in Cuba after Kennedy's assassination. Nearing the first anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination, One can say how they saw a young man transformed before their eyes into a man as he served as their president. What is even more familiar to the people of the United States is the relationship Kennedy was able to bond as president. Not many presidents leave office with people wanting more of them, and Kennedy's tragic exit from office and life only solidified the American public's support of him. Thousands attended his public viewing, and millions more watched the uninterrupted coverage of his funeral on television, exemplifying how much our country loved President John Fitzgerald Kennedy and mourned with his family. A young Kennedy once struggled to speak written speeches while on the campaign trail for his eventual seats in the House of Representatives and Senate. However, what his family and many of his supporters quickly learned was JFK could bring heart and honesty to the words he spoke during his campaigns. JFK's ability to speak from within was why he could connect so well with the American people, and why he was elected to the highest office in his land. Kennedy's connection with the people did not stop there. As president, he had to make hard decisions that sometimes did not turn out to be the right ones. The biggest example during JFK's presidency was the failure to invade the Bay of Pigs invasion. Kennedy could easily not address the catastrophe that unfolded, but he went on national television and took complete blame for the events that unfolded. The failure took a heavy hit to his administration, but taking responsibility was the only decision JFK could make because he had to tell the whole truth. Taking responsibility is a gutsy thing to do in his case because it was early in his first term. There are a handful of people that were working for him at the time that he could have asked to cover it up. There were presidents before him that would have never done what he did because it would hurt their image too much. But Kennedy did not want to be like his predecessors, who did nothing for the American people or lied straight to their faces when events like this happened. But Kennedy wanted to revitalize the American presidency, make it fresh, and really connect with the people. There's really no doubt that Kennedy accomplished both of those things in the almost 3 years he was president of the United States. And now, here's a short commercial break.
Coca-Cola. Refreshing.
In 1961, in order to stop East Germans from escaping to West Berlin, a barbed wire barrier was put up. Then in August, Khrushchev threatened West Berlin and ordered construction of a 12-foot concrete wall. Streets, the railway, the S-Bahn were severed and stations of the U-Bahn were closed. The wall included guard towers, anti-vehicle trenches, and other defenses. Kennedy sent more U.S. troops to West Berlin as a deterrent. After the wall's erection, around 5,000 people attempted to escape, circumventing the wall, with figures of the resulting death toll varied between 98 and 200. In 1963, JFK traveled to West Berlin, where he received a hero's welcome. Kennedy gave a speech in which he says in German, "Ich bin ein Berliner," meaning I am a Berliner. As of today, Germans can still not travel to the West Berlin. The wall stands in their way. The Cuban Missile Crisis. During his presidency, Kennedy, a devout anti-communist, continued containment and proposed flexible response to counter the Soviet actions because Khrushchev promised Soviet aid for what he called wars of national liberation throughout the world. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, Castro asked the USSR for defensive weapons. Instead, in October 1962, the USSR gave both offensive and defensive weapons. United States U-2 planes photographed the installation of launch pads for nuclear weapons on their flights over Cuba. Kennedy went on national television calling for the withdrawal of the nuclear missiles and announced a naval blockade of Cuba to keep Soviet ships from bringing the missiles to the sites. U.S. warships were sent to intercept the Soviet freighters when Khrushchev agreed to have them turn around. The U.S. pledged not to invade Cuba and that it would pull some missiles out of Turkey at a later date. Today we know that the Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest the world ever came to nuclear war. At the time, Kennedy had the U.S. Armed Forces at their highest state of readiness ever, and Soviet field commanders in Cuba were prepared to use battlefield nuclear weapons to defend the island if it was invaded. Khrushchev had overreached, and Kennedy's strong stand was seen as a victory for the U.S. in the Cold War. This more than negated the harm done by the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. It became apparent after the crisis that the need for nearly instantaneous and full-time communication between the two countries. In June 1963, following the Cuban Missile Crisis, the U.S. and USSR set up a hotline of communication between Moscow and Washington. It was to lessen the threat of an accidental nuclear war, and the two countries were on the brink of war. JFK and the Civil Rights Movement. Going into office, JFK criticized his predecessor, Eisenhower, for not doing enough for civil rights in the U.S. However, Kennedy was pushed to act by protests in the nation, led predominantly by civil rights groups, the NAACP and CORE. Additionally, Robert Kennedy, appointed Attorney General by his brother, the president, focused on enforcing provisions of the 1957 and 1960 civil rights laws. Freedom riders in the 60s were being violently beaten, especially by members of the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan hoped that this violent treatment would discourage young people from taking part in freedom rides. However, this only encouraged more than 1,000 people to take part in the freedom rides. Local authorities were unwilling to protect these citizens, so President Kennedy sent 500 federal marshals from the north to do the job. In 1962, 26-year-old Air Force veteran African-American James Mathis tried to enroll as the first black at the University of Mississippi. His decision was met by violent riots of protest, including that of Governor Ross Barnett. JFK ordered federal marshals and troops to Mississippi, as well as federalizing the National Guard to assure Meredith's admittance to the university. Meredith would get his degree, but at the cost of $4 million in government expenditures for his protection. Kennedy's presidency was also headlined by the August 1963 March on Washington that Dr. Martin Luther King led and delivered his I Have a Dream speech. President Kennedy established the Peace Corps by Executive Order 10924 on March 1, 1961, to send volunteers to third world countries to help their economic development. These countries were often new, emerging, or developing countries in Africa and Asia that were not aligned with either the United States or Soviet Union, and broken off from European imperialism. The volunteers served in remote areas of the world as teachers, engineers, public health workers, and technicians. The program proved to be one of the most innovative and highly publicized. Tonight we have Eleni Ratsiz, one of the first people to be sent out as a member of the Peace Corps. Eleni recently returned home from Ghana, where she was stationed for 2 years. Eleni, what made you want to join the Peace Corps?
I joined the Peace Corps after having taught for 2 years right out of college in a school in the inner city of Philadelphia. I got the job really young, and I have always loved teaching. I knew I was making a difference in the kids' lives because school was keeping them off the streets and safe. But after the Peace Corps was announced, I saw a new opportunity to make a real impact in the world and develop the minds of kids who have never before been able to get an education.
How was your experience while you were in Ghana?
My experience was really eye-opening. The kids in Ghana were never able to get an education because there was nowhere to have class, and the villagers were poor. When the Peace Corps sent me there, I got to teach these kids and see them grow in knowledge in 2 years, then in their whole childhood. I will really never forget the kids I taught because I learned so much from them by living in conditions that are completely foreign to how Americans live.
What were the reactions of the natives to an outsider living in their new country?
Most of the natives were welcome to our presence because we were helping teach them and develop their towns and villages so they could sustain them after we were gone. However, there were some natives that did not welcome us warmly because they were suspicious of Americans and our motives in their countries.
Would you ever volunteer in the Peace Corps again?
I would absolutely volunteer again because I know I was able to use my talents to help kids that really have nothing. I have always dreamed of seeing the world, but this really brings out the adventure inside a person. It's no tourist attraction because they send you in such remote areas. You really get immersed into the culture of the country. Most of the humanitarian effort you gain stays with you. I come back in search of humanitarian efforts nationally, but after researching them, I realized that yes, a lot needs to be done in our nation, but I think there is nothing like being in the center of a small community.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the NBC Nightly News coverage for tonight, September 27th, 1964. Thank you for watching, and have a good night.